You are sitting in your house
Whoa!
right now with a heating bill that arrived this month. Maybe it was $180, maybe it was $340, maybe it was higher than that, and you just tried not to think about it too hard. What if I told you that 30 miles from where most Americans live, there are families who have not paid a single heating bill in over 200 years? Not because they are cold, not because they are suffering, but because they never forgot something the rest of us were quietly convinced to stop knowing. The Amish have been heating their homes through Pennsylvania winters, Ohio winters, Indiana winters, using a system that costs nothing to build and nothing to operate. And the reason you have never heard of it is not because it is complicated. It is because the moment you understand it, you stop writing checks to people who have been collecting them from you your entire life. The first time I saw this, I was visiting a family outside of Millersburg, Ohio. It was February, 22 degrees outside. I walked into their main living space expecting to find a wood stove blazing in the corner, burning through cords of firewood, the way every off-grid house I had ever been in was heated. There was no wood stove running. There was no fire. There was a south-facing wall with what looked like a simple wooden frame built against it, covered in dark glass, and the room was warm, genuinely warm. The kind of warm where you take your coat off within 30 seconds of walking in. The man of the house, a quiet guy in his 50s named Eli, I am not making that up, told me his grandfather had built the first version of that wall in 1951. His father rebuilt it in 1978 using slightly better materials. He had rebuilt it himself in 2003. The design had not changed in 70 years because it did not need to. He told me something I have never forgotten. He said his family had never once in 3 generations called an energy company to ask permission to be warm in the winter. I stood there thinking about the $280 heating bill sitting on my kitchen table at home. Here is what nobody tells you about the American heating industry. Before natural gas lines were run into American homes, a process that happened rapidly between 1950 and 1970, the majority of rural American families heated their homes using passive systems, thermal mass walls, root cellars that stabilize temperature, south-facing windows designed intentionally to capture winter sun, buried earthen berms that insulated foundations. This was not primitive technology. It was refined over generations of practical necessity. Then something happened. The American Gas Association, founded in 1918, spent 40 years lobbying state and local governments to make natural gas infrastructure the mandatory baseline for residential construction. By 1975, most American building codes had effectively been rewritten to assume a gas or electric heating system in every home. They did not ban passive heating. They did something more effective. They made it invisible. They removed it from architecture schools. They removed it from builder training programs. They stopped including it in any government housing manual or subsidy program. And they spent decades of advertising convincing the American consumer that comfort required a thermostat, a furnace, and a monthly bill. The global heating and cooling market today is worth $240 billion a year. Every dollar of that depends on you not knowing what Eli's grandfather built in 1951 and rebuilt twice since without spending a cent. You already understand exactly how this works. You just never applied it. You know how the inside of your car gets unbearably hot on a cold, sunny day. Windows up, sun pouring through the glass, and within 20 minutes, you cannot touch the steering wheel. That is not the heater running. That is glass trapping solar radiation as heat with nowhere to escape. You know how a black t-shirt gets hotter than a white one sitting in the same sun. Dark surfaces absorb radiation. Light ones reflect it. This is not science class. This is something you have noticed your whole life. You know how a brick wall on the south side of a building stays warm hours after the sun has set. Dense materials absorb heat slowly and release it slowly. That is why old stone farmhouses stay warmer in winter and cooler in summer than any modern construction with a system running full blast. What the Amish figured out, and what builders knew before the gas companies rewrote the rulebook, is that you can combine all three of those things you already understood into a wall that heats your home using nothing but sunlight and physics. No fuel, no bill, no permission required. It is called a thermal mass wall. The specific version the Amish use most commonly is a variation of what architects call a trombe wall, named after a French engineer named Félix Trombe, who documented it formally in 1964. But Trombe did not invent it. He observed it. Variations of this system appear in Anasazi cliff dwellings in the American Southwest, built over 1,000 years ago. Adobe construction throughout the American desert Southwest used the same principle. The Amish came to it independently through generations of practical observation. They simply noticed that south-facing dark walls stayed warmer and that rooms built against them needed less firewood. Trombe wrote it down and put his name on it. The Amish just kept using it. The knowledge is the same. Here is the system in plain terms. You build a dark-colored wall, ideally dark stone, dark brick, dark concrete, or in the Amish version, often dark painted wood, directly behind a layer of glass or clear plastic on the south side of your home. The gap between the glass and the dark wall is about 4 to 6 inches. During the day, sunlight passes through the glass and hits the dark wall behind it. The dark surface absorbs that radiation and converts it to heat. The glass traps it the same way your car windows do. The temperature in that 4-inch gap between the glass and the wall climbs to between 100 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit on a clear winter day. That superheated air cannot escape through the sealed glass face. So it does two things. First, it conducts heat directly through the wall mass into the living space behind it, slowly, steadily, for hours. Second, the small vents at the top and bottom of the wall, just holes with simple flaps, let the hot air circulate into the room through the top vent, while cool room air is drawn in through the bottom vent to be heated and recirculated. No moving parts, no electricity, no fuel, just sunlight hitting a dark surface behind glass. When the sun sets and the outside temperature drops, the mass wall, which has been absorbing heat all day, begins to release that stored heat into the living space, slowly, steadily, through the night. A properly built thermal mass wall on the south side of a home in Pennsylvania can offset 30 to 60% of the home's entire winter heating load on sunny days. In a well-insulated small home, it can maintain comfortable temperatures through the night with zero supplemental heat source. That is not a fringe claim. That is measured. That is documented. That is what the Department of Energy quietly published in a technical manual in 1980 that nobody in the heating industry had any financial interest in promoting. Here is exactly how to build the simplest version yourself. Identify your south-facing wall. In the northern hemisphere, south is where the winter sun travels low across the sky. That low angle is what makes this work. Winter sun hits a vertical south wall more directly than summer sun, which rides high and mostly misses it. This means the system collects maximum heat in winter and nearly none in summer. The geometry is self-regulating. Paint the exterior of your south wall with flat black paint, the flattest, darkest black you can find. This alone makes a measurable difference. Dark surfaces absorb up to 95% of solar radiation. Light surfaces reflect up to 80%. You just change your wall from a reflector to a collector with a $12 can of paint. Now build a simple wooden frame against that wall. The frame needs to stand about 4 to 6 inches off the wall surface. Cover the face of the frame with the clearest material you can get. Old storm windows are perfect and often free from architectural salvage yards. Heavy-duty, clear greenhouse plastic sheeting works nearly as well at $2 per roll. Cut 2 vents in your wall. One near the floor, one near the ceiling, each about 4 inches by 12 inches. These are your circulation ports. Cold air enters at the bottom. Hot air exits at the top. You'll cover each vent with a simple hinge flap so they close by gravity when the sun goes down. This prevents the system from running in reverse at night and pulling cold back into the room. Seal every edge of the glazing frame with weather stripping or caulk. The sealed air gap is what creates the greenhouse effect. Gaps destroy efficiency. Materials total: flat black paint, a few boards, clear glazing material, 2 simple vent covers, between $0 and $40 depending on what you source free versus purchase. The Amish version often uses reclaimed barn wood for the frame and salvaged glass from old windows. Eli told me the panel on his south wall had cost his grandfather exactly nothing because every material came from something already on the property. Let me put some numbers on what this actually means. The average American household spends $1,100 to $1,500 a year on heating. Over 30 years of home ownership, that is $33,000 to $45,000 paid to energy companies for the ability to be warm in your own home. A properly built south wall thermal system on a modest home reduces that load by 30 to 60% on sunny days. In climates with reliable winter sun, the entire American Southwest, much of the Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic states, that translates to real, measurable annual savings. The system costs nothing to operate. It has no moving parts that wear out. It requires no maintenance beyond keeping the glazing clean. The Amish wall I stood in front of in Millersburg had been running continuously in some form since 1951. 73 years. No fuel bill, no repair bill, no service contract. So over that same 73 years, the average American family spent somewhere between $80,000 and $110,000 on home heating. Eli's family spent the cost of a can of black paint every decade or so when they repainted the wall. Here is the pattern that repeats every time knowledge like this gets buried. In ancient Rome, wealthy homeowners built south-facing glazed rooms they called solaria, specifically to capture winter sun for warmth. Roman law actually protected a homeowner's right to sunlight. You could not legally build a structure that blocked your neighbor's solar access. They understood passive solar heat well enough to write it into property law. When the Roman Empire collapsed and the knowledge of concrete and engineering scattered across medieval Europe, passive solar design largely disappeared from common construction for over 1,000 years. It returned during the colonial period out of pure necessity. Families in Pennsylvania and Ohio who could not afford to import English coal and could not cut enough firewood discovered that south-facing walls and root cellars and earthen berms kept their families alive through winters that killed livestock. The Pennsylvania Dutch communities, many of whom became the Amish, were among the most sophisticated practitioners of passive solar design in colonial America. They positioned their bank barns with the long axis running east to west, so the south face received maximum winter sun. They built their homes the same way. This was not accident. This was knowledge accumulated over generations of paying attention to what worked. Then came 1950. Then came the gas lines, then came the furnace salesmen, and the building code revisions, and the architecture schools that stopped teaching anything that did not require a utility hookup. And the Amish just kept building their walls the same way they always had, because nobody had given them a reason to stop. You are not going to change your entire house this weekend. But you could paint a south-facing wall this weekend. You could build a simple glazing panel this weekend. You could cut 2 vents and cover them with hinged flaps this weekend. And this winter, for the first time, some portion of the heat in your home will come from the same place Eli's family has been pulling it from for 3 generations: the sun, which has never sent anyone a bill. The $240 billion heating industry did not get that big by accident. It got that big because somewhere between 1950 and 1970, it convinced an entire generation of Americans that passive solar design was something their grandparents did because they were poor and uneducated. Their grandparents did it because they were paying attention. Now you are too. Drop your state in the comments and tell me which direction your south wall faces. I want to know how many of you can build this before next winter. Take care. See you in the next one.